asked, which is what I want you to address right now.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges that we have is that there's a challenge not just in stand-up comedy but performing art. There's a challenge with infrastructure.
Yes.
And that has meant that a lot of times, every time we want to put together a show or anything, you have to mobilize everything. So you have to mobilize the sound, you have to mobilize the lighting, you have to mobilize like just almost every single facet of that. And in as much as we're trying to galvanize the government into trying to make this work, we cannot wait for that particular moment to come. Because when you think about it, even the priorities of the government right now, are they going to feed people who are starving in Mandera, or are they going to build stand-up comedians a platform? So what we have done is that we have actually been able to collaborate and partner with different spaces that allow us to make the most conducive environment for stand-up comedy. So for instance, I was talking during, I think when the music was playing, we were still talking about the longest running open mic room in Africa, and also the best attended open mic room in Africa, which is the same place. This is a Two Grapes every Wednesday in Kilimani. And this has been going since 2018, and throughout the pandemic it was still going because it is outdoors. So we've been able to create a very conducive environment. We have a stage that really works, and we are able to basically accommodate quite a number of people. And those relationships have been able to propel us and progress us to different spaces. So we're looking at spaces that allow us to basically have the very best let's say environment for stand-up comedy. Are we there yet? We're not yet there, because every time I travel, I go to America, I go to South Africa, you look at some of the theaters that they have, they're exceptional. They're exceptional. But when you think about something like, for example, stand-up comedy, the type of acoustics that it requires are very different from the acoustics that you'd have, for example, for music or for a club. So a lot of times we have people who come up to us and they're like, yo, I have a restaurant, I have a club, why don't you come and do stand-up comedy here? And you get there and you listen to the acoustics, you look at how the sound is set up, you even look at the layout. It's very difficult for you to be able to do stand-up comedy in certain places. So for now, DJ King, for me to answer your question is, we are engaging with all these stakeholders. We are trying to talk to these people. And it's not just the government. There are also people in the private sector who are really, really pushing hard to be able to make performing arts more accessible, but also reach an international standard. But at the moment, the way things are standing is it has to come from us. So for instance, all the stages that comedians perform on, like the actual physical stage, I have built with my team. Like we have fabricated it by hand. So those are some of those elements whereby I'll not wait for someone to do it. I will do it until we get to a point where someone else can see exactly what we're doing. It's very easy for you to say, I want to engage the government, but if the government sees you doing something, then they're more likely to come in and provide support rather than you sitting there and say, we can't do stand-up comedy because we don't have the best locations. But at the same time, it is also about how do you as an organizer understand your craft well enough for you to be able to say this venue will not work. So for instance, the venue you're talking about, the acoustics are off because as a stand-up comedian, one of the things that is very important is that you must be very close to comedy is very intimate. Comedy is very intimate. So when people are sitting way over there and you're standing here and you're performing, sometimes you can't even hear the feedback. You're in a theater and you're telling jokes and you're thinking, my God, I'm doing so badly. But it's because the laughs in a theater are designed basically for the sound to go backwards. It's not coming back to the stage. So it's those nuances.
And that, of course, is a big motivation for comedians, especially when they're on stage. They hear the laughs, it keeps them going.
It's the only thing, like, trust me, if you get on a stand-up comedy stage, it's like a drug. You get on that stage and you're able to hear those laughs. It's the biggest validation you'll have.
Absolutely.
It's the biggest validation you'll have.
That's
especially
wonderful.
for people who are a disappointment to their parents, like ourselves. You're like, oh yeah. I want to hear people laugh so that I can compensate for my mom telling me I'll never be mwalimu wa math.
Thank you. That's the one we're supposed to address. All right, let's talk about the landscape right now. First things first, you're passionate about it. Even from the talking, you understand this craft. You know too well what it requires. All right, the landscape itself, we as consumers in Kenya, how is it on a scale of 1 to 10? How are we embracing it? That's one, all right? Number two, this has to make sense. The math has to math. You put in all the effort, you give all the world class class jokes. You need to get money at the end of the day, right? So talk to me about, is it really sustainable when it comes to embracing it? Are we really embracing it? Like you'd see millions of people turning up in the US to see somebody, you know, crack them up, and they would make a ton of cash. They're millionaires, you know. So is it sustainable, number one? And number two, are we embracing it as we should?
So there are two things I always tell even other stand-up comedians is that this thing is an investment. If you think about it, our industry is less than 10 years old. It's less than 10 years old. So what we're doing right now is we're basically trying to build what we call critical mass. And critical mass is in two ways. Number one, we must build critical mass in terms of the performers. So when Punch and Comedy Club was starting, I think in total, like in the English stand-up comedy scene, we had about 12 to 13 stand-up comedians. Right now, if I count just the new comedians who were at the workshop yesterday, we're talking at a number that is almost at 28 or 30. This is brand new comedians who've been doing this for less than 3 months. And so that means that we're building enough of critical mass, because when you want to be able to consume, you must be able to have enough variety, especially for something like stand-up comedy. Because, for instance, Sauti Sol can basically go in the studio, lock themselves up there, create an album, and then show up like 6 months later, banger. And people are still listening to Susanna, people are still listening to Mr. Officer, like they're listening to all that old music.
Absolutely.
But with stand-up comedy, it's very different, because once you hear the same joke 3 times, it's no longer funny.
It's not.
So you must build critical mass by having various comedians who have various talents and various styles, and they can bring this all together. That's number one. But now, in terms of people embracing it, is that the quality, as I mentioned, is they've been watching the Dave Chappelle's, they've been watching the Chris Rocks. The quality must get there. So we do have people embracing it. We do have people now getting into it. We have people who come for our shows religiously. Like last weekend, we had a sold out show. The entire of our open mic lineup this year has been sold out, whereby it is completely full. We're telling people, please stop coming because tumeja. Sold out. It's sold out. And Kenyans, you know, when you tell Kenyans you can't come in is when
that's when they're coming.
So again, it's really about being able to look at how do we galvanize and how do we do this. But it's not only that, it's being able to say this is a quality product.
True.
And when people say, oh, you guys are doing stand-up comedy, I say we're not in the business of stand-up comedy. We're in the business of entertainment. So the people we are competing with are not other stand-up comedy clubs.
It's entertainment in general.
It is entertainment industry.
Musicians.